Welcome, everybody, to the Rico 12 Ask It Basket. I'm Justin B. I'm a son of an all-powerful, perfectly loving God and a recovering addict living in the miracle of recovery one day at a time. And I'm just so grateful for this way of life. It has really been an amazing journey of ups and downs, exciting journey, I think is how I'd like to put it. And today I'm continuing this exciting journey as we seek God, as we seek the solution in the disease of alcoholism. I'm just grateful to have Robert Pardon here, one of my great friends in recovery. And I've got a new friend here that's joining us, Whitney B. And I'm just excited to get to know her a little bit as we go into this Ask It Basket. So, Robert, why don't you take just a minute, introduce yourself, tell us how you're doing, then we'll talk to Whitney for just a second about that.
Yeah. Well, my name is Robert, and I always introduce myself as a recovered alcoholic. As I came into the program back in February, we're coming up on 39 years since I was introduced to AA, and my first 12-step program was Gamblers Anonymous. So you can tell I was a messed up individual when I got here. And when I got here, I denied my alcoholism, and then I understood that the alcoholic in me was foundational to every other untreated aspect: pornography, gambling, compulsive overeating, bulimia, drug addiction. Everything centered around my need to drink. And drinking was never enough. So I had to resort to other addictions just to make my feel good. And I'm grateful that I found the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, which would help uncover my other addictions. And one by one, little by little, I've been able to overcome all of them one day at a time. And I have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. So it's great to be here with Justin, a great friend of mine, and it's wonderful to be here with Whitney, who is becoming even a better friend of mine as well.
That's awesome. Thank you, Robert. Whitney, why don't you introduce yourself just a little bit here?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Whitney B, and I am an alcoholic, of course. I was born in Salt Lake. I was raised in Salt Lake. Started having issues with addiction when I was in my early 20s. And it's been, like you said, an exciting journey, to say the least. I've had a lot of ups and downs, a lot of efforts to recover and falling back down and getting back up. And it's been fun. This last year, I'm at 9 months here, almost 10 months.
Yeah.
And found recovery down here in Orem at Reflections. And it's been an amazing process this last year. And I'm excited to keep going with it one day at a time, like Robert said.
Awesome. Welcome, Whitney. Excited to have you. I was also born in Salt Lake City 100 years ago, and now I live in Spokane, Washington, away from Salt Lake, and I'm okay with that. Good. All right. So exactly, I'm really happy to have you two here with us, and today we're going to dive into a couple of handful of questions to discuss a little bit more about some of the vital things in recovery. And I've taken some phrases that were sent to me by Robert earlier today. I've crafted them into some questions, and we'll see how this develops from here. So the first thing I'd like to do is throw out this question, that I often hear as I speak with people who are potentially suffer the disease of alcoholism, but just haven't quite admitted it, maybe. And here's the question. Or here's the phrase. A common response I get is, I just don't get it. How does admitting powerless help you? And how does going cold turkey in whatever it is that I'm dealing with make any sense? What's you guys' take on that?
Whitney, girls first.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's a very important step. That was the biggest turn for me in my recovery, was just surrendering and admitting, that first step is very important. It's the first step for a reason, admitting that we're powerless and our lives have become manageable. It's not easy when you're first in recovery. It's hard. That's a huge, I think, relating in early recovery and the fellowship of the rooms is very essential to getting somebody fired up in the program. Let's see the question. Kind of forgot where the question ended, but
how does admitting powerless and going cold turkey from whatever it is even make sense?
Yeah, no, admitting that you're powerless and surrendering and just owning up to, just finally admitting that you're an addict or an alcoholic. It's a huge part of the turn, and once you can do that and humble yourself and open up your, world to the fellowship and the recovery and working the steps and finding a sponsor, that's essential to finding your path into recovery. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but does that work?
Absolutely. Robert, do you have any other thoughts on that to add or supplement that?
I have a thought on everything. Some make more sense than others. No, along the vein of Whitney, and and I want the listeners, whether you're OA, GA, SA, NA, EA, OA, although our addictions vary to a degree, our recovery does not. And so with that, until it says in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which all 12-step programs come from, unless I'm willing to admit or concede, as it says on page 30 in the Big Book, until I'm ready to concede to my innermost self, this is the first step in recovery. Then we admit we are powerless over alcohol or drugs or pornography or acting out, whatever the case may be, whatever makes our feel good. Until we're willing to admit that we're powerless over that substance or behavior, there is very little hope of our recovery. Bill goes so far in the 12 and 12, which he wrote 15 years after he got sober in the first publication of the Big Book in 1939. He said, unless we're willing to admit complete defeat, there is very little hope of our recovery. Even Zig Ziglar, in his goals program, Zig was foundational in understanding life after alcohol. He would say, unless you've admitted that you need help in step one, you're never going to do step two. And we were actually talking about that today in the meeting that I went to at noon here in Sandy, Utah. And it was talking about came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Unless I believe that my behavior, that my life had become unmanageable in step one, unless I admit that defeat in step one, I'm never going to admit that I'm insane in step two. And unless I admit step two, I'm never going to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity, nor will I be willing to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as we understood God. So I must admit that I'm powerless, because as long as I feel I have power, why would I turn it over to anyone or anything? It just doesn't make sense. And until it makes sense, I'm not going to do it. I'm just not. It needs to make emotional, psychological, mental sense to me before I'm willing to take a spiritual leap.
Yeah, and I want to come back to Whitney for just a second. Whitney, take just a minute and describe your admitting powerlessness, your step one experience where you were like, okay, I don't got this. I guess I've got to go in and do things that I've never been willing to do before.
Right. So like I said, I had a struggle with addiction for about 20 years down in Salt Lake City. And, there were definite moments where I tried to get sober for whatever reasons, either the law, I was in trouble with the law, or, for family or different reasons. And I always succeeded for just a short week or so, on my own will. And, without having a program or some sort of spiritual contact with a higher power, I always just fell right on my face, and so finally, with trouble with the law, all these different things, bad relationships, just a very crumbled state of mind. I rolled down into, it was either I was facing prison or it was, either prison or, treatment. And so of course I go to treatment, very resistant, didn't want to be there, didn't want to hear anybody say anything to me about recovery. I was just there to do my time and go back out there. I kind of just accepted the life of of being on the streets and accepted, you know, that I was going to be a lifer and a criminal. That hopelessness was just blaring me in the face. And so, the beautiful part about going to Reflections, and that they emphasize the 12-step program there. The first time I had any turn or any spiritual or any light at all, you know, finally had a group come in. It was an AA panel, and it was a Wednesday night, and they came in and spoke and shared their stories. And I remember thinking, that's just like me. That's how they're describing how I feel. And I'm not the only one, you know. It was just this bit of hope and a bit of light that sparked my interest. And I you know, it was that initial fellowship, you know, and it was relatable. And so, yeah, I went there once, graduated, moved back to Salt Lake City, thought I had it figured out, you know, and a month later, you know, wasn't ready, wasn't working the right program, fell on my face. And that's when I kind of I was defeated. I was like, I gave it an honest effort. I thought I was working a program. I was working the steps, had a sponsor, you know, but just wasn't quite ready to go back to Salt Lake City. And that's when I threw my arms up, and I was just like, okay, whatever it takes, what do I have to do? I will listen. I will take instruction. My will gone. Like, I've never figured it out on my own. After all these 20 years, I've never been able to do this on my own. I give up and surrender. And that was a huge moment. That's when everything opened up for me, and I was able to start to kind of absorb the program and see how and why it started to work in my life. And
thank
so,
you.
yeah, you bet.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I gives me a little bit more picture here, and I think that leads into this next question I have. You know, you mentioned for 20 years you were trying, you'd get sober, you'd clean up for a week or two for different reasons, and even after going through treatment, the one time you like, I had a sponsor, I was doing this, I was doing all these different things, and I still came up short. So, was there ever the temptation, Whitney, and also Robert, this is for you also, to say, why should I even try? I'm never going to be perfect. I'm never going to get this perfectly. Why should I even try? I keep coming up short. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. That was that hopeless state of mind that I reached when, you know, I'd given it an honest effort. I had seen the light a little bit. I gave it all, you know, and still fell short, still succumbed to, you know, a moment that I couldn't resist, you know, and that, you know, those are the things that, you know, like to take people out. You know, you think you can see a friend too soon, or you think you can do something that, you know, you think you're ready when you're not. And it's really disappointing when you fall on your face and you fall and fail. And yeah, there's a lot of this. I want to give up. I remember thinking, you know, I don't want to kill myself, but what am I living for? You know, there was just this hopeless, like, drifting day in and day out kind of mentality that, you know, yeah, I've definitely been there. And I think that's what it takes. I think that's what it takes to finally not succumb, but surrender to this program and give it all up. And that's what it took for me, you know.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Whitney. What are your thoughts on that, Robert?
You know, I think this is where the fellowship of the program is so important. I didn't know how to place anyone. I was, you know, my second marriage was ending. I had walked out of my children, so I couldn't even face them. No one who knew me wanted me around. I wasn't even employable. But there was something magical about the rooms of recovery. The more I went and the more you knew, the more you wanted me to come back, the more you were convinced that I should come back. Conversely, the more you knew about me in my personal life or my business life, the more you asked me not to come back. So I would never tell you how afraid I was to measure up, because you would see me as a person who was weak and who was unable to succeed, and therefore you wouldn't want me around. But when I came to the rooms of recovery and I shared with you little by little by little, the more pieces I gave of me, the more you liked me. And that was very foreign to me. And so I went to a lot of meetings, and that is where I found relief, because the more meetings I went to, it's unbeknownst to me, the more I stayed for the fellowship, the more the plan of recovery began to take root, even without my permission. And before I knew it, I was doing the steps because I wanted to be like you. I didn't. It wasn't required that you liked me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think it does make sense. And I think it leads me to, I'm not going to be perfect, but I'm going to get better as I apply these principles into my life. And I think that goes into like the law of the harvest. I get what I sow, I will reap.
Mhm.
What I put in, I'm going to get back out. And, I think, well, I'm going to share personal experience here. When I first came into the rooms, it was the last thing I was going to try before saying, well, forget this. I'm just going to be this way the rest of my life. And I did not want to be there. In fact, I tried to sneak out right after the end and not get, and be invisible and just say, well, I tried it. It didn't work. I'm out. Gratefully, God had different plans for me, but as I started out, I was like, okay, I'm going to go to these meetings for, 12 weeks, a week a step. That sounds reasonable. And then I'll be healed and out of here. But I've learned that there's meetings every week, multiple meetings sometimes, step work every day, talking with others regularly, having a sponsor, sponsoring others. Is this really all worth it? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, like I said, that first relapse kind of gauged me into what I was doing right and what I was doing wrong, because I had committed to working a program and working the steps and found the solution. But so at some point I still slipped and fell back. But these like slip ups and these experiences are vital. They're gold to the whole journey, because that's where you learn and can critique your journey and see what works for you and what doesn't. And I just like to see any slip up as a huge learning experience, and that's the only way to treat it. It's easy to get down on ourselves, and that's a terrible part of our this sickness and this addiction. Is it shames you, it knocks you back, it just beats you to down, it just beats your self-esteem down. And yeah, like having a relapse and having slip ups, you got to treat those as opportunities. You've got to seek those as learning experiences and how to be better and how to, just don't give up. The miracle does happen and you find your way. And, eventually you're going to love going to these meetings. You're going to want to be there. For me, my program, I mean, for someone like me, it requires, daily doses of this program, staying constantly, in contact with a higher power, working a program with a sponsor, working the steps. And all that magic happens within this process. And it was like a miracle once I had my spiritual awakening and, all these spiritual experiences happening to me on a regular basis. I woke up one day and thought, I don't have any cravings. I don't have any obsession anymore. It's been removed. It's magic. And it does happen even for people like me. And it's so worth the falling down and getting back up. So
yeah, thank you for sharing that. Go ahead, Robert.
Let me just interject something here with what Whitney said and what you shared, what I've shared. I just recently gave my sponsor his 45-year chip, and whether it's Will or me or Whitney or you, Justin, or anyone else who comes before us, or the solution is the same. We're going to tell people the same thing. We're not going to say, oh man, Whitney's got here. She is really screwed up. Boy, what are we going to do with her? I tell Whitney the same thing I was told, which was the same thing my sponsor was told. And I called a friend of mine last week, Scotty. He celebrated 41 years of sobriety, and he was really early on just such a force for me. And you know what? Scott told me what he was told. So everyone down the line, we're going to say the same thing. what you do may work for you, but we're going to tell you what worked for us, and what worked for us worked for the people who told us. Does that make sense? It's not.
Yeah.
It's not like we're difficult to figure out. They know. Here's a big book. Here's a list of meetings. Here, you need a sponsor. You need to get into service right away. It's the same thing.
Yeah. So on that note, Robert, when I said, hey, it kind of reminds me of like the law of the harvest, what you sow, you'll reap.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about that principle in your experience in working recovery.
Well, Stephen Covey, who's one of my favorite teachers of all time, I was introduced to Stephen Covey. And if you don't know Stephen Covey, Principle-Centered Leadership, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, First Things First, Inside Out Approach to Quality of Living, just tremendous speaker of paradigms. Because at some point, when we realize it's not about the substance or the behavior, it's our thinking. We have to reshape our thinking, or as Stephen Covey would talk about, the paradigms. And it's a mental map. It's a way of rethinking how we used to think. It's reconstructing our thinking. Stephen Covey talks about, we got a degree, we got a diploma, but did we get an education? And that's the difference between the law of the school, the law of the harvest. So Stephen talks about, well, if we plant in the spring, but we don't do anything, can we expect a harvest? And what Whitney was talking about every day we do something, we work on whatever step we're on. And Justin, you're saying the same thing. We do the same thing over and over again, and we expect the same result. Insanity in step 2 is we do the same thing over and over again, and we expect a different result. So I can't expect to reap in the harvest if I don't take care of things from whence I plant. Does that make sense? The law of the harvest is the law of the land. Mm-hmm. And the law of the land dictates, I tell people all the time, I know why you stay sober and I know why you relapse. Not because I'm real smart, but because I understand the law of the harvest. I can have no expectation of harvesting a good result, good corn, good bushel, good hay, good wheat, good apples, good whatever I planted, if I haven't tended to them along the way. And that is where the steps really come in handy. We admit we are powerless. We came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore sanity. We turn our will and our life over. We take that inventory. We admit that inventory. We ask God to remove the defects of character. We humbly ask Him to remove the shortcomings. We made a list of people we'd harmed. We do the same thing, and that's the same path. What do we do? What do we tell a newcomer? Here's what you do. If you think you can find an easier way, if you think there's an easier way than the law of the harvest, maybe I'll see you on a relapse. Maybe I won't.
Yeah. And, I don't remember if it was you that shared this with me, Robert. I think it might have been, but I've heard it from somebody that is one of my recovery mentors that I really look up to. And maybe it was you. And I'll pretend like it was you, and you tell me if I'm wrong. I know I have another relapse in me. I don't know if I have another recovery in me. And I think that's a powerful concept when it comes to this. Was that you, Robert, that introduced me to that phrase?
If I did, it was only because it was introduced to me.
Yeah.
What my friend Tom Bennett said, I never had an original thought. If you think that's an original thought, that's not an original thought. And so, and that's true. I was so fortunate because I have seen more people leave than I've seen people come back. And the fact that I made it back to the rooms of recovery blows my mind, because I have to understand, we who have relapsed and have come back, we are the exception, not the rule. I've been on 12-step calls in Las Vegas. I know what a relapse or what a person looks like, and the degree of hopelessness and frustration and despair is not lost on me. And the fact that I've stayed sober as long as I've stayed sober and worked the steps and the 12 steps and stayed in, even though I stay in recovery because of the joy it brought me, I'm not an idiot. I know what happens to people like me who think that a drink is a good solution to whatever problem I'm having. And those dice are too big for me to roll. I'm not going to lose my marriage. I'm not going to lose my kids. I'm not going to lose everything that I have. Even sitting here with you, Justin, or being Whitney's friend. Nothing will ever get in the way of our friendship, but it could get in the way of our recovery. And I could become a statistic of what happens to a person who relapses rather than a person who stays well.
Yeah. So you mentioned, why can't I'm trying to remember how you said it. The idea was, um, I can't take a drink when I'm in a hard place. But what about on a special occasion? Maybe my sibling is getting married and everybody's standing up to toast, the glass of champagne or whatever. Can't I just have a single drink to celebrate with everybody? I mean, I might be the only one not drinking. What's your take on that, Whitney?
Oh, that's very familiar to me. Like I said, I've tried many times to get sober by myself, and even in recovery and treatments and different places. But that's always my demise. Is I think, oh, I've earned this. I've worked so hard. I can just smoke a joint, or I've worked so hard. I can take a drink with my friends, or I haven't seen her in a year. We can just get high this one time, and it's always just this one time. And never is it just once. Never. Every time it leads me into a relapse worse than the last relapse. And it never gets any better. I've learned the hard way that, having that just drink, having that, well-deserved little, break is never worth it. And it will always lead me back to a relapse. I am completely powerless once I take that first drink or that first hit. Everything about me spiritually gets blocked. Everything about me just shuts down. And this disease takes over. It's like my will, self will run riot. That kicks in and I just run off. And I'm just lucky to have made it back to the rooms. Like Robert said, I had a pretty severe relapse. And once you've had a whole head full of recovery and you finally, seeked that path for a while and then you relapse, that's the worst, because like relapsing before, no big deal, you've done it. But after having a head full of recovery and then falling, it's the worst feeling in the world. And I came screaming back into the rooms, Once I had that taste, I never wanted to go back. It was so much darker than before. So
yeah. I've heard it said, thank you for sharing that. I've heard it said that when I work the program, it ruins drinking, it ruins acting out, it ruins using for the rest of my life. If I do relapse, it's like worse than ever. And I just feel like crap. Robert, what are your thoughts on that?
First of all, I agree with everything that Whitney said. I think when I relapsed, I realized how much of an alcoholic I was, and drinking was just the beginning. Within 5 days, I ended up in a hotel room in Las Vegas that was paid for by someone else because I didn't have any money left. And I laid up in that hotel room and I thought, my God, how did I get here? In 5 days, I was homeless. I had lost everything. And I couldn't contact anyone who knew me outside of the rooms of AA. And the only place I knew I could go back and not be judged was the rooms of recovery. It was like Whitney said, I didn't want to die. I just didn't know how to live. But I sat up in this room. It took me 5 days to get back thinking, how the hell did I get here? I'm sick and I need help. I mean, it was worse than the day I went into treatment, because I was convinced back February 9th of 1986, I just went into a treatment center because it was the next best thing. It was the only place I could go. but I wasn't sure I was alcoholic. I wasn't sure I was sick as I was. But when I sat up in that hotel room 5 days after taking that first drink, it wasn't where alcohol had taken me in 5 days. It was where alcohol was going to take me if I didn't do something about it then and now. And that was April 25th, 1986, 14,161 days ago. And there's drinking has never been an option.
Mm. So when you, Robert, and you, Whitney, when you started your streak of sobriety, the day before that, could you even imagine life without alcohol, without weed, without I'm going to make this without gambling, without sugar, without porn, without whatever it is that alcoholism, that disease manifests itself in my life? Could you even imagine your life without that?
I'll go ahead. Absolutely not. Going back 20 years to when this all started, it started pretty, innocent. I was drinking and smoking weed on the weekends with my friends, escalated so quick. And even, through the bouts of trying to get sober and, I always had to fall back on something. There was always something. I mean, I did not discriminate when it came to substances or addictions. I went ahead and had many, and mostly all at once. But that was the hard part, and that's where I kind of surrendered and realized I was completely powerless, and that this sickness, it kicked my ass. Like I was done. It had beat me. I had lost to the game of this lifestyle, and that's what it took. I remember sitting there thinking, I don't know how in the world I would go the rest of my life without using or getting high or, even smoking weed, but it was always just this void I was feeling. And it wasn't even what drug or what, substance. It was any, because it would fill a void. It would, fill a void. And I always went running back to filling that void. So it was really hard for me to imagine anything in my life without some sort of substance. When I finally flipped the script and found recovery and gave it my all and completely surrendered, the return from working a program is filling that same void, and it's, satisfying the same, I guess, joys and pleasures in my life. I've replaced drugs and, all my addiction with this program, and I get the same buzz and the same high, from working a program, going to these meetings. But yeah, I remember being in that hopeless state where I thought, what can fix me? Who can fix me? No human, anything, is going to be able to change me. And it takes a power greater than ourselves, finding God was the only way for me to go. So.
Yeah. Robert,
yeah. Let me just interject real quick.
Yeah, please.
Here I was at the Rhett Butler Motel on 15th and Fremont in Las Vegas. And I was catty corner from a bar. In Las Vegas, bars are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And when I woke up on April 25th, the bar wasn't even an option for me. I knew the only place for me to go was back to the rooms of recovery. Because in the 71 days that I had been there previous, they were the only people I had ever met that I was convinced that they didn't care about anything about me. They just wanted me there. They just didn't want me to die. Everyone else was conditional. And I'm not blaming them, because I train them to be that way. We train everyone on how to receive us. But the rooms of recovery, Justin and Whitney, as you've experienced, were the only place that I could go, as screwed up as I was, and they would say, welcome back. Mm-hmm. And I knew it. I knew, as I sat in that hotel room, the only place for me left to go is the rooms of recovery. And I will do whatever I have to do to be like the men and women I heard in those rooms, because they had what I wanted. And I wanted to feel like they felt. I wanted to I wanted to tell a story that was in my rearview mirror, and they taught me how to do it. And
Yeah.
I'm forever grateful.
Thank you for sharing that, Robert and Whitney. Robert, before we started recording today, you mentioned how when you sponsor somebody, you try and pick up somebody that's been in the rooms for years, who's been sober for years, but needs that next step. Maybe the pink cloud has stopped being so pink.
Yeah.
And maybe the fire is no longer there. How does how do you approach that in those situations to keep them from going back to, well, if this is all there is to this, this sucks. I may as well go drink again. So how do you work through those situations?
Well, first of all, I don't sponsor newcomers only because I'm not able to give them the time that I need, that they need. They need a lot of hand holding, a lot of time. And I do so many things in recovery, I just don't have the time. So I'm not being judgmental. What I do is I turn them over to my sponsees. And I see them and I oversee their recovery, but I'm not in the trenches with them on a day-to-day basis. One of the things that I have learned that my sponsor Will tells me as far as step 10 goes, which are growth steps. They're not maintenance steps because we are not a people who maintain well. We are people who need to be growing on a regular basis. Things that are in motion tend to stay in motion, according to Sir Isaac Newton. So I live in steps 10, 11, and 12, and I do them every single day. And it's only when my pride tells me I'm not at fault when I don't do a step 10. So I approach every day as a new opportunity to be a better version of the person I was yesterday. And Whitney knows me. She knows I live this way. She knows I stub my toe. She knows I have my faults. She knows me on a personal level. But I live those steps every day, and I'm always willing to say I'm wrong when I'm wrong, and willing to go to God on a daily basis and willing to share the message and carry the message. So I live in steps 10, 11, and 12. And a lot of people, they get stuck. I've been stuck. I know what it's like to be stuck in a rut. And a rut is, as I've learned, a rut is a grave with both ends kicked out. And if we don't get out of it, we die there. So steps 10, 11, and 12 keep me fresh every single day. I feel like a newcomer every single day. I feel excited. I feel anticipated. I feel like I'm opening the same gift for the very first time. And I try to approach every area of life the same way because every day is new. There's not a day, even water. If you had a choice to drink water that was flowing or water that was stagnant, which water would you choose?
Flowing water, of course, yeah.
Of course. Of course. I love how you said that. Of course you would. That makes sense. And that's what I try to be. I try to be that living water that is always flowing, that is always fresh, that is always looking for a new vision of something that's old. Every time I read the big book, I look for things that can expand my thinking. I don't look, repetition is the mother of learning. So repeat it over and over and over again. And the Bible says that, whether you believe it or not, this is what the Bible says. Iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. So I hang out with people like you, Justin. I hang out with people like Whitney. I hang around people like James and other sponsees and my sponsor because I want us together to sharpen each other's iron because I'm never finished. I never want to wake up and find out that this was a destination, not a journey. I always want to be on that journey.
Robert, you said something about a rut. Do you remember what you said about what a rut is and what that is? Because it was so powerful.
A rut is a grave with both ends kicked out of it. And if we don't get out of it, we die there.
Man, that is such a powerful phrase. I love that. So Whitney is, I don't know if you've heard him say that before or if you've heard that somewhere else before, but what does that sound like to you in your experience and in your recovery, if looking forward to any ruts you may get in or back to ruts you have been in?
Right. Yeah. No, I haven't heard that before, actually. And I also love that. That's incredible. I've always anticipated ruts. I've been blessed to have, I'm still a newcomer. So this first 10 months, I've been working the steps, very active in the program, very active in service. So I haven't hit a moment yet thank goodness, where I've had any sort of complacency or any sort of, I've been moving forward this whole time. And I know how important it is for me to continue to do that. The things that have worked for me so far it's high commitment. I have my daily things that I do. I call them my dailies. I wake up and I read and I meditate, and I have a whole morning, an hour or two in the morning that it's for me. It's for me to get started right. And that's something, if I leave the house without doing that, I feel empty. There's something wrong with my day already. But what's keeping me going and the fire burning right now is the service and the service-minded side of this whole program. I had no idea how much effect and how much joy I would get from, just the fellowship and serving others and sponsoring women and working with a sponsor. I mean, like he said, we sharpen each other's blades, and it's something that really motivates me. It really keeps me going. It really makes me want to keep learning and just getting better. It's such a shift, even just in a year, to go from such an addicted, hopeless, selfish-minded, totally just defeated person, now waking up and seeking opportunities to help others naturally. It's just coming naturally to me to want to help others. And it's because I get that fulfillment from it. And it's, if you don't have that and you're not on a daily basis having some sort of spiritual, thing going and working a program or working what works for you and just continuing to work what works for you, you might lose that fire. But for me, I know it's going to require that consistently for the rest of my life. I mean, for someone like me.
That's super powerful. And it leads into this next question that I have. And the phrase that leads into it, I can never stop evolving. And we've hit on this a little bit in this conversation. The big book, I can read it and look for new things, set aside everything I think I know to get a new experience. And this is something that I've seen so many times in the rooms of recovery, something similar to this. I've been sober for a year now. I've worked the steps. I got this. Can I just step away from program and live my life because I know how to do it now and I don't need to be all in? So, let's talk to you first, Whitney. You just said, hey, I know I need to be all in, but what happens if you wake up someday and you're like, I'm sober, I got this, and you move forward? How can you maybe remind yourself that you don't?
I think I would hope and I would think that it would kind of reveal itself pretty quickly. I would feel a difference pretty quickly, either spiritually or I'd feel myself falling away from the program, going to less meetings, just withdrawing a lot. And I think those are huge red flags for me. And I've put a lot of time into thinking ahead on those things and thinking, even from experience, when I've relapsed, what were my red flags and what are they now? And it's important to keep those in mind, like you said, it's an ever evolving thing. And for me, this really is just the beginning. I'm just getting started in this life that has done a 180. I mean, in just a year. And I don't want to get too excited, and I don't, but I just know what's worked for me so far, and I'm going to keep doing that. And I mean, I prepare myself, and I have fellowship around. I have people I rely on and people that know me very well on a personal level that I think would have my back if I were to ever start, So when I finally slip, or when it isn't, in my control and I can't see things clearly, I have people I trust, like Robert, who would step in and say, hey, you're slipping. Hey, what's going on? Talk to me, But unfortunately, I've had tons of experience with falling and seeing where I go weak and seeing, where I go the wrong way in my path and what kind of things I need to look for. So knowing that and just, never having that sense of, hey, I beat it. Like, I will never have this beat. I mean, seeing how it beat me, there's no way that's ever not going to be a challenge. I have to commit to this program and my sobriety every single morning when I wake up, or else, it's sneaky and insidious. And I've seen it turn around and bite me, even when I was all aware,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I
Awesome.
just think I have a great support and, a great plan for working that program that works for the rest of my life. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Whitney. Robert, what's your take on that? I mean, you've been in the rooms for a long time, old timer.
Mm-hmm.
How many times have you ever been tempted to say, I got this, and step away? And if not, how have you seen others in that situation and tried to help them out?
First of all, Whitney will stay sober forever because she understands the element, and same with you, Justin. If people knew what your investment was into hosting this podcast and all the things that you do, they would want to be like you even more. Service is the key. It's always been the key.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a person can stop and go to church, do other things and stay sober. I don't know. I'm just not one of them. I know an active member of a 12-step program can't, because in order to be an active member of the program, whether it's OA, NA, SA, GA, any A out there, you need to work steps 10, 11, and 12 once you recover. You can't work steps 10, 11, and 12 and stand in the same place. That's why steps 10, 11, and 12 are called growth steps. Joe and Charlie, who articulate the big book better than anyone I've ever heard, said, I challenge anyone to live in steps 10, 11, and 12 and not grow. So we're always growing. We're always evolving. I think a person who's been sober a year or 2 years, they're just tired of being told what to do, and pride comes back, and they stop working with others. They stop praying. They stop taking their inventory. They start taking mine, and which is okay as long as you use it for you. But service is always the key. I was very, very where Whitney was a few months ago when the light went on, and it goes on in all of us. I was 6 months sober, and I was afraid that I was going to relapse again. And I went to my sponsor and I said, what do I do? Because he'd been sober 12, 13 years at the time. What do I do? Because if I go back out, I will never come back. I knew it. And I was afraid because it was starting to do the steps, starting to get honest. And that was a frightening thing for me. And so my sponsor said, what you need to implement is service. And he said to me, he said, I've never known a person who is actively involved in service who has relapsed. And you know what, Justin and Whitney? Whitney knows I get so much joy. I'm like a kid on Christmas Day. I get so much joy out of serving others, because that is where I find my value. And who doesn't want to feel good about themselves? I feel good about Robert Pardon because I'm serving other people who are doing better. They've got a restored marriage. They're employable. They've got their legal situation. The finance company isn't looking to take their car at 3 a.m, so they don't have to hide it anymore. And I owe all of that to serving others. My value increases as your value. Even Zig Ziglar, going back to Zig Ziglar, you want to be successful? Go find enough other people and make them successful, and you will be successful. Every successful person in life has helped other people become successful. Because money, as Zig would say, money can buy you a house, but it can't buy you a home. And I want a home. I want a nice place to rest. I want to wake up the next day and say, I did that for so and so. Look how good I can feel. God, what's next? And so why I stay sober has been replaced. I stayed sober in the beginning because I had to. The law was after me. The finance company wanted to take my car. My parents wouldn't let me come over. My ex-wives wouldn't talk to me, my children. All the reciprocal things, the coercion. And eventually over time, that was replaced by, I just felt good. I felt better than I've ever felt before. I'm 71 years old and I feel 50. I can do all the things. And if I was drinking and using, I'd be dead a long time ago. So I stay sober and clean and away from pornography and the other things that would have a tendency to weaken my strong life because of the joy that it brings me. I'm not under the threat of drinking, although drinking for me is like taking my 9mm and just blow my brains out now because eventually I'm going to die. But I stay sober and clean and away from these other behavioral influences because of the life that I have. I love the life that I live, and I do everything based on just sheer enjoyment on where I'm at today, and I would do nothing to jeopardize that or give it away.
So this has been a really powerful conversation. Before we wrap things up, I mean, I think we'll pick up, there's a few more statements here. We'll pick up on this next time we do an Ask a Basket, I think. But before we wrap up, do you have any final words of wisdom, I guess, for us, Whitney? Any other thoughts that you have from this conversation that you'd like to share before we wrap up?
Sure. One thing that kept kind of sticking out to me, popping up in my mind as we went through this conversation is every level and every part of your journey and your recovery. I think it is so absolutely important to stay honest. In your relapses, stay honest. As you continue to work the program, just honesty is absolutely critical, and it sounds so simple, but it's, when people are coming into the program, that's where the surrender is you just finally get honest with yourself, so I know it's not much, but I just want to leave it at that. Just stay honest no matter what. That is the most important thing in recovery, especially after a relapse, just stay honest and work your way back.
Yeah, thank you for that. I love that experience of honesty there. Robert, do you have any final words of wisdom for us?
No, I think Whitney buttoned it up quite nicely.
Beautiful. And one thing that I learned about the time when I started podcasting, and this was back in 2017, and my first podcast project was not recovery related, although I was sure putting these recovery principles into everything I was doing in the conversations I was having. I learned what my why is in life. I learned what I believe God put me on here to do, and that's to inspire others to see their own worth. And I think in doing these types of conversations with people and them sharing their own experience, strength, and hope, them sharing their own struggles and their victories and everything like that, yes, that inspires the people that are listening. But I think it inspires you to continue doing what you're doing. And man, it sure inspires me, and it helps me see my own worth too. So I get a payoff from it. And I love this opportunity to be able to do these types of things with so many people and learn so much. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Whitney, for being a part of this. Everybody out there, keep coming back. Come all the way in, sit all the way down, stay. Don't just check the boxes. Get in here and serve and don't go through the program. Let the program go through you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And because you're worth it.